You know that quote from the historian Edward Gibbon? It just perfectly sums up what we're about to get into. Think about it. For over 1,000 years, one single civilization pretty much defined the Western world. Its story isn't just about some dramatic sudden collapse. It's about an almost unbelievable endurance. It's about asking, how on earth did it last for so long? So, today we're doing a deep dive into the Roman Empire. We're going to explore how this one single city managed to conquer, well, basically the entire known world. How they came up with laws that, believe it or not, still affect how we live today. They built a legacy that literally outlasted its own gods. But, and this is the big question we're going to tackle, how could something so incredibly powerful just vanish? Okay, so here's our roadmap for this epic story. We're going to kick things off right at the beginning, tracing Rome's rise from just a small village. Then, we'll look under the hood at the machinery that powered the empire at its peak. After that, we dive into the brutal spectacle of the Colosseum. From there, we'll chart its slow, painful unraveling, untangle the complex reasons for its fall, and finally, we'll discover how Rome's legacy is, well, it's still all around us. All right, let's start at the beginning. How does a small collection of mud huts on a swampy riverbank become the absolute master of the Mediterranean? The secret sauce? It wasn't just about raw strength. It was about a totally unique political and military culture. Rome was a place that did something incredible. It transformed itself from a kingdom into something totally new, a republic. So after they kicked out a truly tyrannical king, the Romans basically swore never again. We are never going to be ruled by one man ever again. And so they created the Republic. Now, for its time, this was a radical idea, right? The idea that power should be held by the citizens. And this political innovation, it became the absolute bedrock of Rome's strength. It allowed them to focus all of that ambition outward, toward conquest. And you can see this whole idea perfectly captured in just 4 letters that you'll see stamped on pretty much everything Roman. SPQR. It stands for Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and People of Rome. And look, this wasn't just some cool motto. It was the central idea of the entire republic. It represented that constant, really delicate balancing act between the wealthy, aristocratic Senate and the common, everyday people. You know, that tension between the classes, it really could have torn Rome apart from the very beginning. But instead, it led to another crucial innovation. The plebeians, the regular folks, they demanded that the laws be written down for everybody to see. The result was the 12 tables, actual bronze tablets displayed right in the forum. So for the first time, there was a transparent legal code. This social contract created incredible internal stability and trust, which in turn allowed Rome to focus on one thing: expanding. And the engine that drove that expansion was the Roman military. I mean, they created a professional, standing army, not just citizen farmers called up to fight. And the discipline was just brutal, best shown by the practice of decimation. If a unit broke in battle, 1 in every 10 of its own soldiers would be chosen at random and then beaten to death by their own comrades. It's horrifying. But this brutal discipline forged an army that didn't just fight, it built. Roman legions were engineering crews, building the infrastructure that held the empire together, all driven by this core belief in violence for purpose. So, with most of the known world conquered, the challenge completely shifts. It's not about winning wars anymore. It's about running a massive empire. This was the era of the famous Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And this period wasn't just sustained by legions. It was held together by absolutely incredible feats of engineering and logistics. Just try to wrap your head around this one challenge: feeding the city of Rome. By the 1st century AD, its population had swelled to over 1 million people. It was the largest city the world had ever seen. And keeping them all fed required a staggering amount of grain, a constant flow from places like Egypt and North Africa. The emperor's power depended on it, because a hungry population, that's a rioting population. The entire operation depended on absolute control of the Mediterranean Sea. But see, getting the grain to the coast of Italy was only half the battle. Rome itself is 15 miles inland. So what do? Well, their solution was Portus, a massive artificial harbor. These giant seafaring ships would dock there. Their cargo was moved to the stunning hexagonal basin, surrounded by warehouses, then transferred to smaller barges, which were then guided through a specially dug canal to the Tiber River for that final journey into the city. It was literally an assembly line for food on a scale nobody had ever seen before. And that engineering genius was just
everywhere. They built aqueducts that carried fresh water for hundreds of miles. Their famous roads were basically the arteries of the empire, connecting Britain all the way to Syria. And crucially, they mastered a revolutionary building material, hydraulic concrete. By mixing in volcanic ash, they could create concrete that would actually set underwater. This allowed them to build these massive, unbreakable harbor structures, like the one at Caesarea in modern-day Israel. They were literally conquering the sea itself.
Okay, so now let's turn from the machinery of empire to its cultural heart. A place that was a marvel of engineering in its own right, but also a symbol of Roman power, spectacle, and its very unique, very brutal brand of entertainment, the Colosseum. You've probably heard the phrase bread and circuses. Well, this was the political formula for any emperor's success. The green shipments took care of the bread, the Colosseum provided the circuses. These games weren't just entertainment, they were a powerful political tool. The emperor's presence there was key. Everyone could see him, and he could see everyone. It was like a contract. I give you these incredible games, and in return, you give me your loyalty. And the games, well, they were also a stage for Roman justice, which was anything but equal. If you were a high-status criminal, you might get a quick private execution. But if you were from a lower class, a slave, a foreigner, your death was part of the show. Being thrown to the lions wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal, brutal form of public execution. The Colosseum was used to reinforce the social order and send a very clear message about the power of the emperor and the state. But you know, sometimes that message got complicated. Take the case of Ignatius of Antioch, a Christian bishop who was condemned to die in the arena. The Romans wanted his death to be this terrifying lesson. But Ignatius, he saw it completely differently. He embraced it. He compared himself to wheat being ground by the lion's teeth to become pure bread for Christ. Now, for the Romans watching, this was just baffling. Instead of cowering in fear, he died with this willing grace that just sparked curiosity. The attempt to stamp out this new faith totally backfired, and martyrdom became a powerful tool for spreading Christianity. But here's the thing, even at its absolute peak, this vast empire was carrying the seeds of its own decline. So now, let's explore how that long, slow unraveling actually began. A lot of historians point to one single emperor as the turning point, Commodus. He was the son of the great philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius. But where his father was disciplined and thoughtful, Commodus was erratic and totally self-obsessed. He scandalized the elite by fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum. He antagonized the Senate. He renamed Rome after himself. His reign really signaled a decay in leadership and a breakdown of the political glue that had held the empire together for so long. After Commodus, things just spiraled into what's called the crisis of the 3rd century. I mean, for 50 years, the empire was a blur of pure chaos. Generals were murdering their way to the throne, only to get murdered themselves just months later. Barbarian tribes poured across the borders. A devastating plague wiped out huge parts of the population, and the economy just collapsed. The empire that came out the other side of this crisis was fundamentally changed. It was more militarized, more bureaucratic, and stretched to its absolute breaking point. So, how did it all end? The classic question, why did Rome fall, is kind of misleading. There was no single cause. Modern historians really see the collapse of the Western Empire not as a single event, but as this slow, really complex process. A cascade of crises that all hit each other and just overwhelmed a system that was already weak. You have to think of it like a perfect storm. Politically, you had constant civil wars. Financially, runaway inflation was gutting the economy. Externally, you had immense pressure on the borders from groups like the Goths. On top of all that, you get a climactic crisis, a little ice age that caused crop failures, and a social crisis with the rise of Christianity. Now, none of these things alone would have destroyed Rome, but together they created this fatal feedback loop. Climate change causes famine, which weakens the people, which makes them more vulnerable to plague, which weakens the army's ability to fight invaders. See how it all connects? And this timeline just shows how fast things fell apart at the end. In 376, the Goths crossed the Danube. Then, the empire is permanently split in two, fracturing its resources. Then, in 410, the unthinkable happens. The city of Rome itself is sacked for the first time in 800 years. And finally, in 476, the very last emperor in the West, a little boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, is quietly kicked off the throne by a Germanic chieftain. There wasn't some great final battle. By then, the title Emperor of the West was just empty.
But here's maybe the most important takeaway of all this. 476 was not the end. Not really. In the East, the Roman Empire would actually continue for another 1,000 years. And even in the West, Rome never truly vanished. Its ideas, its language, its institutions, they were so powerful that they just transformed, casting this long shadow that still shapes our world right now.
And that legacy isn't some abstract thing, it's incredibly direct. Roman law, for example, became the backbone for the legal systems across most of Europe. Their language, Latin, didn't die. It evolved into languages like French, Spanish, and Italian, spoken by nearly 1 billion people. And the engineering principles they pioneered in building aqueducts, roads, using concrete are still fundamental to the world we build today.
So let's end with this thought. Maybe the whole idea of Rome falling is the wrong way to look at it. It broke apart, sure, it changed, it evolved, but it never truly disappeared. Its legacy is baked into our legal codes, our languages, our architecture. So the real question isn't if we can see Rome's shadow today, but rather, once you start looking for it, where can't you see it?